let's move on to panel C. And very briefly, before I turn it over to the panel C leader, the members of panel C are all individuals who have served on history project or history committees for their regions, and their projects have come to fruition. So we have Jimmy K from New Jersey, and we have Habib from Costa Rica, we have Jorge from Colombia, from New Zealand we have Redmer and Gina, and from New York we have James and Peter. So Peter is the panel leader, and I'm going to mute myself and he can unmute himself.
Peter, great for recovering addict. We've met quite a few times and had real success in doing this. There is a file that I included that I sent to Lynn that has that list of questions for the interviews that should be shown. The link should be shown some point when anybody can get that list. First up, we have Jimmy K speaking on dealing with 2 different regions in his state and creating archives for both. Jimmy, you're up.
Did you unmute Jimmy?
I gotta find him.
I got him if you can't find him, Peter.
Yeah, okay, do it.
Where'd he just go? Go ahead, Jimmy. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Jimmy and I'm an addict. And by the grace of God, I'm alive and clean. Got a message here from the translator, Oscar. Don't talk like a New Yorker on a double shot of espresso from Vito's Cafe. Got you, Oscar. Hey, folks, I'm glad, honored, pleasure to be here. I see so many faces out there I know and the ones I see and don't know. Great to see you all. Thank you to the planners, the organizers, all the panelists. Great job. This is a great start. This is something, where have we ever seen before? So many history committees, book committees, history enthusiasts, historians come together in Narcotics Anonymous. So I'm certainly glad to be a part of this. New Jersey, let me lay a little groundwork or foundation and form a context of what we were dealing with, and then I will speak on the topic of archiving. So New Jersey, when Narcotics Anonymous started, was one region. In fact, our region was formed in September 1984, this month 36 years ago. But today, since 1990, we've had two regions in New Jersey. One is the Northern New Jersey region that formed in 1990, and then the region that formed in 84. Since the mid-90s, New Jersey has had what we call shared services. And what that means is both regions split and have statewide meeting lists, statewide helpline, and statewide website. That's from the mid-90s. So the regions work and cooperate in the spirit of unity on these services. So in 2010, 2011, when New York was writing their book, some of that information came to us. Some of us went to some of their meetings, and they encouraged us to start a history committee and a book committee. So let me make a note. New Jersey was not a book committee, has not been, but that doesn't mean it cannot be going forward. So the idea was given to us to go to shared services and make this history project a statewide shared services committee. And that happened through the encouragement of New York. My wife was sponsoring the New Jersey regional chairperson at the time, and the Northern New Jersey regional chairperson was someone I got clean with in the Bronx. So they said, bring it to shared services, which means they had to make a motion at shared services, and it had to go back to each region to be approved. And that happened. Additionally, I should say this shared services, statewide shared services committee, they meet 3 times a year. And that's where they meet to go over any problems, issues, share expenses, and work out the logistics and administrations of these subcommittees. So they work very well in that way. So in 2011, when the idea came up, took a little process for these motions to go back to the regions, come back to shared services. And we had our first meeting in August of 2012. And we had a good dozen people there. And we made the purpose of the committee was to be to research, document, and archive the history of Narcotics Anonymous in New Jersey. And we decided to go to 1990, when we then had 2 regions. And each region from that point in time going forward would be responsible for their own history. So let me get into archiving a little. And I've heard a lot of recurring themes today. And it's so important that so many things that happen in studying, researching, and documenting history, it's very repetitive. But archive is defined as a collection of historical documents or records providing information about a place, institution, or group of people. So in our case, we're collecting historical documents and records on the history of Narcotics Anonymous in New Jersey. Archive also means to place or store something in an archive. So this takes a lot of work. You know, we came up with getting MP3s to do the interviews like the other committees have talked about. We got 4 MP3s, 2 for each region. And then we got 2 external drives, the large ones, the terabyte or 2 terabyte ones, 1 for each region. And that was where we would scan, copy, and upload all of the documents that we could find. That way we digitized it. In New Jersey, I think we called it digitalized. But anyway, at each, and we named ourselves H&A, History and Archives. We wanted to copy H&I. We had to be similar but different. And when we met at this H&A committee, and in the beginning we were meeting monthly, because there was so much work to be done in between getting these archives. And at these meetings, we would upload all the documents to each hard drive, and external drive. And that was so that each region had a copy and that we had a backup. So we had to preserve the original documents. And you could do that in plastic covers and plastic containers. There are actual archive boxes you can buy. They're non-chemical or they're chemical, they're archive safe. Non-acid, non-lignin, they're protected by UV rays, ultraviolet light. Everyone knows if you store something for a long time in the basement or an attic, you know, they can decay, they can mold, they can mildew, they can be destroyed, they can discolor. So by archiving, we're trying our best at preserving the original documents. And it's a very time-consuming process, never ending. Right? And we only got so far in the 5 or 6 years of the committee. We accomplished a lot. I heard the gentleman from Connor from Dublin say cataloging. You know, we never got to a finalized catalog phase, but certainly the work is always there and it always needs to get done. We did a lot of presentations at events, conventions, and this is so that we can find documents, find archives, find records. And that would stir up interest and lead to more interviews and NA members, old timers, sharing some of what they had in their garage or in their house for years. You know, old early days of service, material, things like that. So, and we didn't collect everything first and then do interviews second and then do archiving third. You know, this was a real fluid, fast going project. We were doing it all at once as much as we could. You know, it was a process of collecting, researching, interviewing, copying, scanning, archiving, doing presentations, ongoing, nonstop, with no end in sight. I mean, it's a lot of work. There's no, you know, timeline. You're going to get this done in a week or 2 or a year or 2. It can really be endless. And so we had to go and find these archives and records and find, discover, search, dig, beg, borrow, steal, any piece of information we could find. Old minutes of service meetings, flyers, early service minutes. conventions, activities, dances, speaker jams, barbecues, egg hunts, cookouts, fundraisers, newsletters, newspaper articles, and most of all, interviews with live members who were here when Narcotics Anonymous began. And we would interview the members and transcribe. We transcribed most of those interviews. So you had to record it. You had an audio and a written document of the interview. And so we followed a lot like Greater New York Region did. We had the same interview questions for members and non-NA members. Each of our regions had a storage unit. We don't have regional offices still to this day in New Jersey. We have regional storage units, and they contained a lot of stuff in there. That was a treasure trove. But we found old literature, everything from old meeting lists, old car reports. Most were unorganized, musty, dusty, dirty, nasty, not in good condition. We tried to sift through that and whatever we could copy and scan, because it was important to preserve it. We put out flyers announcing the committee, requesting members to participate, to be interviewed, to share their history with us, to share their memorabilia and whatever artifacts or archives they had. Some were willing. We've had people turn over boxes to us. I've had this in my garage for 20 years. You guys can have it. I want to donate it to the History Committee or to the regions. And so each piece of information became a piece of a larger puzzle. And, you know, each piece of information that came, whether it was from a human, a storage locker, at an event, led us to more interviews and more other leads on where to go to find more information, to copy, scan, and store. And you got to have some type of chronological order of listing and sorting things, because when you're collecting so many numerous documents, it's hard to find, hey, where's that fundraiser from 1984? Which one? The one from September or the one from May? So title and labeling it became a very important issue for us, especially on the external drives. How are you going to label and track this and file it? And we had files, 1979, 1980, 1981, 1982. We found by listing documents by year was a good way. And once you get very familiar, you kind of know the significant events in a year. But what happens when you leave the committee? What happens when you're no longer there? What happens if you move away? What happens if a new member comes on a committee? Can they understand the system that you had, storing and preserving this? So that's something to think about. I talked about archive covers. You can buy museum archive storage boxes. They're not, you know, they have the protection to protect documents a little longer than if you stored them in a regular box. I don't know if I mentioned about the storage units being climate controlled, all right, or temperature controlled. It helps a lot with preserving documents longer. So that finishes my piece on archiving. I don't know if I have another minute or two. I will say history is interesting, it's exciting, and it can be fun, okay? It can be really rewarding. Those moments that some of the others talked about with people crying and remembering events that occurred and how this started, you can't beat that. One quick story, when we started in August 12, we had a list of people we were going to interview. We found an NA member, came in early 80s, very instrumental with the forming of the region, went to the World Service Conference, co-chaired the World Service Conference in the 80s and into the 90s. And he tells us on the phone, I've saved everything I ever got in Narcotics Anonymous. August 2012, Superstorm Sandy came a month and a half later, leveled his house before we could interview him, lost everything. The guys in New York doing the book, Jimmy, when you going to start the history? When you going to start the history? I'm in a meeting in Staten Island on a Friday night. Hank, Ben, Elwood come in. When you starting the book? I go, well, you know, I'm thinking of it. You got to do it. The old timers are dying. So I encourage everyone, thank all of you who are doing this or some form of it, because it is vital and essential to remember where we came from. And I believe I'm out of time. New York Minute. Thank you all.
Peter's still an addict. And now we have someone to read what Habib wrote. Habib is from Costa Rica, and we have, oh, now I can't remember the name. Darn, that happens to me.
Carla?
Carla. Carla will read what Habib wrote.
Hi, I'm Carla. I'm a grateful recovering addict,
Hey,
and I'm the RD from Costa Rica. I'm super grateful that I was invited to this project, and it's funny because even though that I was not involved in the process, and I was able, by the grace of God, of being humble enough and say, you know, I cannot participate in the process. It's because of my personal process right now. I'm working on saying, no, I can't. I'm in too much stuff, you know, and the people of service, I'm pretty sure they can relate. Because, you know, I'm in like 5 things right now. You know, I'm chairing a zonal forum work group, and I'm the RD, and I'm in conventions, and I'm in HNI. And to be honest, I only say no because it was, you know, the meetings were held at the same time than that ad hoc committee that we have right now. We're working on a region that is actually based on reopening the regional office. And I wanted to thank Jimmy. I wanted to thank Jimmy because what you were sharing helped me a lot. So it was definitely a higher power process that I was here today. So what I'm doing today is just reading. I did not actually participate on the process, but you know what I have is the 16 years that I've been clean in NA Costa Rica. But I'm gonna read today. So this is what Habib S., who's actually the person who wrote this book, wrote. I did the translation, and this is what I'm gonna read. So it says the process of the book, the history of NA in Costa Rica. In 1994, a small group of 3 friends from NA, Manuel C., Sergio B., and Habib S., began to meet on Thursday to share on a famous small diner called Soda Lolita to chat about the project of writing the history of Narcotics Anonymous in Costa Rica. They spent a lot of months meeting on Thursdays, and the project did not move forward at all. It was very pretentious to write the history of the fellowship when the first group was established in 1986. So there was only 8 years of NA functioning in Costa Rica. Basically, there was no history. So one day, Habib S. decided that the way to move forward was with action, and began to write without telling Sergio and Manuel. Surprisingly, about a couple of months in the writing process, the file got lost in the computer, and he was never able to recover the data. Then Habib thought it was a sign from the higher power that clearly said that the project needed to be a collective work and not individual. A lot of years went by, and in 2007, again, Habib thought it was the moment to write the history of NA in Costa Rica because there was a lot of things and events to talk about from 1986 to 2006. It was like this that a plan was designed through which we would dedicate 3 months to investigate the history of NA, consulting documents and interviewing many people that had an important role in the first years in which the fellowship was established. The problem was that he did not have enough resources to self-support either himself or to publish the book. So he came up with a way through personal and anonymous contributions of some wealthy members of the fellowship, which it was certain that they will help support and finance the book as a contribution for NA Costa Rica. To guarantee that the project will be nonprofit, Habib went to a public notary where he made an act and in which he renounced to any patrimonial rights of the book he was to write in favor of NA Costa Rica. This way he started his work, and simultaneously he contacted other NA members who agreed to contribute money for the project. About 35 people contributed small sums that were insufficient. Then Habib went to a specific member who contributed a large amount of money, about 90% of the required amount. Maybe 7th tradition alert. When Habib, who at the time was the chair of the Regional Service Committee, shared the project with the RSC, That majority of members got excited with the project, but there were 2 members that were strongly opposed and started to present opposition in the meetings of the service body. One of them went further and began to visit any groups and began spreading falsehoods about the project and Javier personally. In the end, when the book was finished, the RSC named a committee of 3 members who read and approved it. In this way, the project reached the core of the RSC to be approved and financed and printed 500 copies, and that would benefit NA only. There were 2 RSC meetings in which the project was strongly debated, and at the end, it was decided to present it in the Regional Service Conference for approval. There was a lot of opposition at the conference as well from 2 people, but finally the project and to publish it got approved. In October of 2008, the book was published, and the last copies were sold in the Regional Service Office and in the conventions. The last couple of copies were sold at the CLANA 2019, which is the Latin American Convention of NA, held in Costa Rica. So that's what Javier wrote, and it's pretty much the history of the making of the book.
Thank you, Carla.
Peter here again. For those who are interested in getting a copy of the Costa Rica book, it's downloadable in a PDF. Up next is Jorge from Colombia.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Jorge. I'm an addict. I'm grateful to be here. I was the chair of NA History Work Group in Colombia. I apologize for not doing this presentation in English. I am not fluent. Oscar is going to translate for me. En la conferencia regional 2012 se aprobó una moción para crear un comité ad hoc encargado de recopilar la historia de NA en Colombia con motivo de los 30 años. De existencia de nuestra confraternidad. Oscar está traduciendo, ¿no es cierto? Este comité estará bajo la responsabilidad del comité regional y debía presentar una propuesta a los grupos en la conferencia del 2013 para decidir qué hacer con el material recopilado. ¿Qué hubo, Oscar? Oscar, ¿me escuchas o no? Oscar, estás... Ya. Oscar, ¿me escucha? Ya. Estaba en el canal equivocado. ¿Vuelvo a empezar? Ya. Hicimos un plan de trabajo contestando a las preguntas: ¿qué queremos hacer? ¿Quiénes? ¿Dónde? ¿Cuándo? ¿Cómo? ¿Cuánto costará? En el que dimos nuestra misión: recopilar la historia de NA Colombia con motivo de los 30 años de la existencia. Compartir la historia de los orígenes de la confraternidad para que sirviera de inspiración a los miembros actuales y futuros en sus esfuerzos por llevar el mensaje. Aprender de las experiencias, logros y dificultades en esos momentos cumbres del servicio que cambiaron el rumbo de la confraternidad. Conservar el material histórico existente en los archivos de la oficina de servicio y presentar a la Conferencia de Servicio Regional 2013 una propuesta económica viable para su publicación. Queríamos contar cómo se formaron los grupos, cómo empezamos a hacer servicio, cómo nos fuimos encontrando y uniendo con grupos de otras ciudades y otros países, cómo con el contacto con la Oficina de Servicio Mundial nos fuimos tomando una identidad y este mensaje escrito, con las primeras traducciones, nos llevó a crecer. Empezamos a recopilar todo el material histórico de los momentos más importantes de NA en Colombia, documentos, actas de servicio, fotografías, objetos y artículos históricos, recuerdos, memoria de los miembros. Queríamos contar la historia en imágenes y en palabras. Queríamos contar en nuestro libro que tuviera muchas fotos y poco texto. Dale, Oscar. Para invitar a muchos a participar, hicimos un video de 9 minutos inspirando a los miembros a ser parte del proyecto de historia. Lo presentamos en la Convención Regional de Cartagena 2012. 40 miembros de todo el país hicieron parte de este comité. Hicimos un cronograma de trabajo por trimestres. El primer trimestre, empezando en julio del 2012, necesitábamos terminar en junio de 2013. Primer trimestre nos dedicamos a reunir información. En el segundo la clasificamos y la ordenamos. El tercer trimestre hicimos un borrador y cotizamos los trabajos y en el cuarto lo publicamos.
Oscar, I'm sorry, but people aren't hearing the English. I don't think they know how to turn on the interpretation on the bottom. I'm trying to tell people that they have to look for the interpretation thing and then turn it on. But they're saying they can't see it. Okay, thanks. Okay,
Continue.
But are there people who can't hear Oscar right now? That's what I think is going on.
Yeah,
People
Lynn,
can't hear you, Oscar. That's the
let
problem.
me jump in real quick, Lynn. So if you don't if you're hearing Jorge in Spanish, you want to go to interpretation and select English. That's what you want to do.
Okay, continue or not?
Yes, continue.
Okay. Presentamos a la conferencia 2013 una moción para que aprobaran el libro de historia como un souvenir del paquete de convención regional y la moción fue aprobada. Imprimimos 1000 ejemplares, 50 de ellos como edición de lujo en pasta dura. En esta convención, 800 personas pagaron el paquete y recibieron el libro. Y se vendieron casi todos los ejemplares de la edición especial. Esta edición costó aproximadamente $2000, unos $2 por cada libro. La idea central de nuestro libro está plasmada en el título. Unidos hacemos historia. En la lectura de algunos apartes de la introducción, ustedes van a ver esta idea claramente expresada. Nuestra historia se escribe cada día, cada vez que prestamos servicio. Por esta razón, este libro no pretende ser la historia completa de Narcóticos Anónimos en Colombia. Solo pretende ser un recuento de algunos de los momentos principales del servicio que han ayudado a construir la confraternidad que hoy tenemos, que han hecho posible que miles de adictos estemos disfrutando el regalo de una vida limpia. Queremos compartir los orígenes de nuestra estructura de forma detallada en la primera década, 1983-1993, donde todo lo que sucedía era primera vez que pasaba. Nos hemos apoyado en las imágenes escaneadas de documentos que reposaban polvorientos en folders AZ de un destartalado anaquel de la oficina. De las otras 2 décadas, 93 al 2013, hicimos una síntesis de lo más esencial, prestando una especial atención al evento más grande que hemos tenido el privilegio de celebrar, la Convención Mundial en Cartagena. Tenemos también un capítulo con una breve reseña del origen de los grupos en cada una de las ciudades del país. En los documentos que encontramos vimos cómo con el trabajo de servicios de muchos compañeros nuestra hermandad pasó de tener unos pocos grupos aislados en diferentes ciudades a tener más de 100 grupos en más de 20 ciudades. Esto fue escrito hace 8 años. Si estos grupos no se hubieran encontrado y reunido a trabajar juntos bajo la misma estructura de servicio, posiblemente habrían desaparecido como tantos otros que se intentaron abrir antes de 1983, pero que no lograron permanecer. Algunos desaparecieron por no seguir tradiciones, otros por ser una mezcla de programas terapéuticos o de corrientes religiosas. Lo que ha marcado la diferencia es haber permanecido unidos a pesar de todas las luchas que como comunidad hemos enfrentado a lo largo de estos años. Sin importar qué fuerzas hayan tratado de dividirnos y destruir la confraternidad, han sido más fuertes los lazos que nos unen. Un poder superior, máxima autoridad de nuestros grupos, siempre al final ha permitido que superemos juntos los momentos más difíciles, las crisis más agudas. Terminamos la introducción hablando con los miembros del futuro, con los que van a llegar dentro de 20 años. Quizás este libro está hoy en las manos de alguien que no había nacido cuando se escribió. Queremos de... Sí, dale, Oscar. No, hagámoslo juntos. Queremos decirte a ti que aún no has llegado, que desde siempre te hemos estado esperando y deseando que te sientas bienvenido e identificado cuando llegues. Queremos decirte a ti. No, seguí. Dale. Que puedas sentir que no estás solo. que puedas sentir que no estás solo, que este mensaje ha sido transmitido por una cadena de amor y de esperanza que hoy llega hasta ti, desafiando el tiempo para decirte que es posible una nueva manera de vivir y que la vieja mentira ha muerto. Sí, nos recuperamos. Sí, vamos a leer el último párrafo del libro donde se presenta la visión del futuro y el significado de conocer nuestra historia. Así es. El futuro. Algo más nos será revelado. Llegamos al final de este libro, pero nuestra historia continúa escribiéndose. Las páginas que siguen están en blanco, esperando ser escritas con servicio desinteresado. El futuro de nuestra hermandad será el que juntos construyamos. NA será en nuestro país y en el mundo lo que nos esforcemos por construir. Está en las manos y en el corazón de cada uno de nosotros y de los miembros que están por llegar, el disponernos a aprender de los errores del pasado para seguir creciendo o seguir cometiendo los mismos errores. Nuestra experiencia colectiva es nuestro mayor capital. Hoy, conociendo nuestro pasado, podemos decir, sabemos hacia dónde vamos porque sabemos de dónde venimos. Muchas gracias. Oscar, perdóname, déjame decir la última cosa. Aquí al lado sigue la foto de un paseo que hicimos en el barco y debajo está el último párrafo de el libro Living Clean. We travel together as one in fellowship, and we pave the road as we walk in for all who may follow. No matter how far we have come, or how far we have known we have to go, when we live clean, the journey continues. Thanks. Gracias, Oscar.
Peter Gray for Recovering Addict. Next up, we have New Zealand with Gina and Redmer. Can we unmute them?
Okay. Go ahead, Gina.
Morning, Gina, addict. Where's Red? Red, unmute yourself.
Oh, you need them both you guys at the same time. Okay, 1 minute. Go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, good, good. How can I follow that? My God. But I'll try. My name is Red and I'm an addict from New Zealand. And it's really wonderful to be speaking from the green island of New Zealand, way down at the bottom of the world. Many of us now call it Aotearoa, our indigenous Maori language for the land of the long white cloud. I just want to say I'm actually very excited to be hearing speakers from Moscow, Colombia, Istanbul, New York, Dublin, Paris, Vegas. This is, to me, this is just mind blowing. You know, I'm so excited. We're making history. You know, I want to thank so much the people who have put this together. I also want to acknowledge some friends, Connor in Dublin and Bertul in Istanbul. Bertul, when you shared this morning, things really came to life for me. This thing caught fire for me. Thank you. I felt so much your passion for the history, which is what I feel too. And I think we all feel that here. Yeah, I want to let you in on a secret. This morning, I'm an unashamed history nerd. I'm a nerd for this, you know. I love stories about the past, hearing them, telling them, writing them down. And I especially love stories about our past, our fellowship's past. This is family history to me. This feels like family history. And I'm just guessing. I've just got a feeling there might be some other history nerds in the room here today. Just one or two. And it's the stories that I heard here as a newcomer that made me want to keep coming back. As it says in the basic text in the introduction to the personal stories, our program comes to life through the voices of our members. Which brings me to our fellowship history, Keeping New Zealand Clean. This book that we published in New Zealand in 2005, with that beautiful cover that I love so much. I want to talk today about why we did our book and how we did our book. And just a wee bit of background, our fellowship got started in 1982, our Aotearoa New Zealand region in 1989. So it took a little while to get a service structure going. I came in 87, so the first area service committee was underway. And I want to quote something from the introduction to our book. This is a book about an idea catching fire. It's a story of how one member, and I want to pay tribute to this one member, Janet C. She'd found a spark of NA recovery in Australia, and she carried the concept home, where it was carefully tended, the spark. That addict, Janet C., has been our guardian spirit ever since. I attended her 40th anniversary on Zoom a few months back. Our fellowship in New Zealand's interesting. We're a bit of a matriarchy. I'm just putting that out there, you know. And it's just quite an important part of who we are as a fellowship. I just think it's interesting. We have these cultures, these different cultures, and how we operate. By the early 2000s, we were starting to think about a book as a region. We were a quarter of a century old, with about 100 weekly meetings and 3 ASCs. The regional committee felt that doing a book would be a way to capture our experience, strength, and hope as a community. It was Ish, this experience, strength, and hope, that was really, really important to our members, new and old. We especially wanted to capture the stories and struggles of our founders and the stories of Janet and other founding heroes like the beautiful Gina, who will speak in a few moments. We also thought that doing a book would be a good way for us to take inventory as a fellowship. And that's something, I think that's something for us to think about today. We also thought it might be a good public relations tool because we'd added in a survey of our fellowship at the time. We'd done a survey of our members. So we put this in the book. But it was more than all of these things. I guess we realized that we had a past. we had some history. And we were getting old. None of us. So our history was rich. We had rich history, and it was our history. So getting the book going, a few regional committee folks pushed back, asked a few hard questions about why are we doing this? Why are we spending hard-won 7th tradition money on a book? And we debated that, talked about that, kicked that round. We decided it was a good idea. And I think we were lucky, hearing what I've heard today, as a community, but we're a bit smaller. It was a bit easier for us to do this, to kind of get the thing going. And the region basically entrusted a small team to run the project with me as the lead person. So how did we do it? And what would a history book look like? One thing we did early was we got hold of a copy of a brief fellowship history done by the Australian Fellowship in the 1990s called Recovery Down Under. I don't have a copy with me, unfortunately. I've lost my copy. Australia was always our guiding light, and I want to pay tribute to Australia today. We'd hope to get Garth involved. He's rather busy at the moment. We were part of their region until 1989, when we broke away and formed our own region. And their book was about their long journey, their struggles towards getting a service structure going. And I think in some ways I think our stories about service are really what this stuff's in some ways about. So we looked at this book, we saw chapters about the handwritten letters from Jimmy Kay at the World Service Office in the 70s, the starter kits he sent to Australia, the first groups, the first areas, and then a region. That was the spine of the book. That was the kind of core of the book. There are also chapters about all the regional services, histories of literature distribution, conventions, PR, and H&I. We realized that was the stuff that we wanted to cover. So how did we structure the book? Well, we basically stole the Australian model. We framed up a synopsis, a list of chapters, timelines, etc. We also started to think about artwork, all this memorabilia that we have, the flyers, badges, newsletters, t-shirts, all that memorabilia. And how were we going to tell the story? We had already established a kind of regional archive, a whole lot of cardboard boxes of musty old records and convention financial reports. Remember those? So we had very thorough minutes of meetings, convention bid documents and final financial reports, flyers, etc. So our own paper records was a great place to start. So we started going through those records. And we'd always been a good little regional committee at keeping records. We'd always had very good secretaries. Love those people on our committees. Maybe the hardest job anyone ever does on a regional committee. I send my respect. And one of my main messages today is that we now realize as service bodies the many benefits of keeping good records. It's not only about accountability and transparency to the groups we serve. These records also contain huge amounts of information that's very useful when writing our stories, when writing our history. They also help settle arguments, so we've got something written down. But what about the people? The members? We knew that to make the book relevant to the readers, we needed personal stories. We could have done interviews, which we've heard about today, but that can be so time consuming, all that transcribing. So we decided to do a shout out to the fellowship and get older members and younger ones to send us stories by email. And that's something I want to just sort of sow a seed about today. We asked people to write down in their own words their most significant recovery memories from service, from conscience meetings, from conventions, from 13th stepping disasters. We pretty much put no limit on the word count. This took several months and involved a lot of chasing up. This is NA. But folks got what we were doing and gathered a lot of material. And we told people we would edit their contributions and send them back to them for final review before they were placed in. Yes. And I'm now going to ask Gina what that experience was like for her as being a contributor.
Thanks, Red. Hey, Gina Addict, everyone. I'm quite in awe here because there's a whole lot of you on here who have done history, and I'm using, I can see Chris Budnick's there. I'm using some of your work in my university work myself at the moment. So I'm kind of, yeah, you're my heroes. Redma is definitely a history nerd, not just a NA history nerd, but a history nerd of all sorts. He's sort of like world famous here in New Zealand. And I realized in doing this that him and I have actually crossed paths over the years a few times around some history projects, the NA and then another one. I just think that's kind of weird, but cool. So I didn't write, I made a couple of notes. I just wanted to freestyle this, what it was like. So I'd heard about, there was a history book being put together that Redma was doing it. I just thought he was doing it off his own back. So I came into the fellowship in 1985. So I'm one of the earlier, I'm considered an old timer here. So that was like 33 years ago. And fellowship was very small and we all knew each other. So by the time I'd heard talk of this book, and I wasn't really involved in any, I'd done service on and off, but at this point I was studying. And Redma was doing the book, and I just thought he was doing it off his own back. I mean, really, it's quite sort of, I didn't think much about those things. My world, I think your worldview gets sort of bigger, extends as you get older. But at that point, it was just very, contained about my own life. But I was studying, I was sitting at the computer, and I was on a area list. So the emails were coming through, and that was quite a new thing for us. And I saw a new read, and I saw this email come through asking for stories, and I knew I had some good stories and I knew they were important to capture, but I didn't realize the significance of what I was contributing to. So I sat there and I think I wrote a page of just different little stories. So in the book, I'm Gina S. That's annoying being a female because I've gone Gina S, maiden name, Gina R, first marriage, Gina H, second marriage. But yeah, so I wrote down these stories, sent them, and I had more. And I remember saying to Red, oh, I've got more, I'll do it. But I never did it. I never got round to doing it. I was so busy, working, family, study. And I'm just so glad that I did contribute. And so it's still, so yeah, there's this book, woohoo, whatever, didn't think much about it and my sort of narrowness of my thinking. But 8 years ago, I moved to a smaller city of New Zealand, and I got there and it was a little bit like, to me, it felt like I'd stepped back in time to what the fellowship was like. When I first came in with all the infighting, I mean, you couldn't, nobody could make a decision because you'd have a meeting on, having a meeting. So I'm glad we moved on from that and that we can make decisions. but then we were all too scared to fuck things up. So, I went to this small town and I was a little bit like, they were there were things going on, there were feedback going on in the meeting and double sharing. And I'm like, oh, what's going on here? So, maybe my approach wasn't the best, but a few of them got a little bit like, who does she think she is? And then I remembered that I was in this book and I'm like, oh, here, this is me. So it suited me. I'm like, yeah, here's the book. Here's me. I'm in the book. Look, but now it's moved on to something else. So I was talking to Red last night, and like some of the people who contribute to that book didn't stick around, and some of them they stayed clean. And it did get me thinking, and it got me thinking. I mean, one of the most important things to me in my recovery now, and the pennies just dropped for me really, and that's my sanity. And that's what I love about, I've stuck around in this fellowship and I've given back to it. And for the most part, I move away. Sometimes I feel really insane, and like, we all know, God, if you could read my mind, but I come back, it brings me back to my sanity. And as I age and get older and do these Saturday meetings of panel C with these old aged white guys, and I'm the only female. Okay, cool. I've got, yeah. I need my sanity. So I think that another book is probably due, whether it will be Red who does it again or me who contributes to it. Our fellowship has changed so much here in New Zealand. Like I'm in Auckland this weekend. We can't do meetings in Auckland at the moment, but I can from where I'm from. But, the meetings where I have come up, done meetings, the fellowship, the culture of it is so different. So when I came into this fellowship, it was very white, middle class. And now it's very, very inclusive of many, many cultures and races, and it's just grown. And we don't all know each other. I don't know these people, they're just, yeah, I mean, it's amazing. It blows me away. So I think, what we did was make some history with the book. Red did the work, really. I'm grateful that I got to contribute, and I think that, another book will be on its way. And thank you for letting me share.
Okay, hey Gina, thank you so much. It's really, really wonderful to hear from you. And I'm going to have to just talk for a few more minutes. I hope it's okay. I've just got a little bit more to cover, guys. So Lynn, I hope I'm not going to upset people with any stopwatches here. So just quickly, as we sat down to work, we found great stories tucked away in the minutes in the newsletters. These were stories that gave insights into what members were thinking and feeling at the time. And we placed a lot of emphasis on humor. And I just want to touch on one or two of these stories. We found the minutes of the 6th RSC, for example, had a long discussion about a pair of women's knickers on the table at the meeting. This was the early 80s. The committee discussed the fate of the lingerie and decided to return them. We found stories about arguments over who was an addict, debates that still had pushed us to think about our traditions. Take this one from 1982. We found this in the minutes. One of the first conscience meetings was about who qualifies as a member. A couple of our members felt that they had addictive personalities. Others felt they were dabblers, were trifling with the meetings, which had life and death meaning for some. This issue was resolved by reference to our third tradition: the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop using. Well, this little one from Christchurch in the 90s, when there was still a tiny number of groups. Minutes from the meeting recall a discussion on the need for an in-depth reading and discussion of 12 steps and traditions. and the group decided there is a need to read the steps, but they were fearful that reading the steps may be detrimental to their recovery due to the small number in the fellowship at the present. So that's such a revealing story, you know. So I'm just a couple more quick things, guys. I know I can see Peter, he's getting nervous. I'm kind of worried. Is he smoking a cigar yet? By 1990, all that very early uncertainty and inexperience was behind us. We were doing good as a fellowship. But a decade later, we crashed as a region. We had really bombed. It wasn't working out. We couldn't get, we were dysfunctional. Our trusted servants didn't trust each other, and we could not attract new members to come on board. What was the problem? We wondered whether the committee might just go into recess, and that was going to be a big thing. So we held a vision day in a central location near a big freshwater lake called Lake Taupo in the center of the island of the North Island. A lot of people came. We talked about communicating better with the fellowship, the use of 7th tradition funds, and trusted servant training. That was a painful story to have to cover in our book, but it's part of our history. So I'm just about out of time. Just one or two very quick things. We were able to get our book done within a year. We were fortunate to get it done fairly quickly. I hear that other communities are taking a lot longer. We were lucky to have a good relationship with the publisher, and I'm really, really happy that we got a really wonderful artist who's a member of our fellowship to do this beautiful picture on the cover. And I'm going to close now with a quick quote from the introduction to the book, and then I'm going to just leave it there. I'll just say this: building a working community took 1,000 mistakes. At times, people ran out of the room in tears, vowing never to return. Some went out and used and died. Others thankfully stayed. Again and again, we were forced to revisit our 12 traditions, providing us with practical guidelines on how to run our groups and get along. Thanks to these traditions, our community and our members survived. Keeping New Zealand clean is a warts and all story. And I think history needs to be warts and all, guys, actually. In many ways, it is our community taking inventory on close to a quarter of a century of existence. Our survey results published provide hard evidence that NA recovery is working for hundreds of New Zealand addicts. Many voices can be heard in this book. Voices bursting with pride, with joy, with gratitude. All are looking forward to the next quarter century and the one after that. We do recover. Thank you.
Peter, great for recovering addict. Thank you,
Yeah.
and thank you, Gina. Up next, we have James and myself. James R., you're up.
Hi, everybody. My name is James. I'm an addict. Everybody hear me good?
Good to go.
All right, great. I'm here to talk about The Impossible Dream, History of Narcotics Anonymous in New York, our book, you know. And we came up with the name The Impossible Dream because the first, you know, not the first World Convention, but the 13th World Convention in New York is called The Impossible Dream. You know, so that's one of the reasons why we went with that name for the book. Another reason was prior to 1981, with the Rockefeller Laws in New York, which if some people don't know, you know, it was illegal for, you know, addicts to conjugate. So, you know, we couldn't have like meetings in New York. So it was kind of like an impossible dream, you know what I mean, that addicts, you know what I mean, can recover, you know what I mean, in New York. And, you know, that lie is dead. We do recover today in Narcotics Anonymous, you know, and especially in New York. So I just want to get right into it because I don't have that much time. I'm going to be speaking about a little bit before the book and a little bit about, you know, what we did during to get this book done. What ended up happening was, me and another recovering addict, we were delegates at the World Service Conference in 2006. And, for anybody who's been there, right before the conference starts and right after the conference ends, a lot of regions from all over the world sell their merchandise. So we started seeing books like Australia, did a history book. New Zealand did a history book. Southern Exposure, Florida did a history book. And, me and this other person were saying, something, we got a story to tell in New York. We could do this, you know what I mean? And I've always been like, a history guy, when I was a kid, I always wanted to be an archaeologist. That never happened. But something, I did fulfill my dreams in Narcotics Anonymous because I was able to, get with this project and, contribute a little bit, towards this book, So our dreams do come true in Narcotics Anonymous. So what ended up happening was like, when we got back to New York, we started talking about like, a lot of the early members started dying and they were getting old, and, a lot of earlier members had diseases, from, disease of addiction and, some other health, stuff as you get up there in age and everything like that. So we started saying, now's the time to do this or whatever, and let's see if, we got some interest, right? And also what was happening at the time was when we got back to New York, we were doing some review and input, for the 6th edition of the basic text with the personal stories. So I actually, got on the Greater New York Region, Literature Review Committee. And that's, where some more conversations started. And we started talking to people and everything like that, who would want to get involved, who would want to be with us and actually do the work. Because it's not about like, putting this on your service resume, I did this and that or whatever. It's about like, who's going to actually go through the archives, who's going to actually go out there and do the interviews and do like, the grunt work, and get this project done, So we had to find members, who are capable of doing this, who want to get down with this thing, right? And we ended up, doing that. But what we also did was like, we sent it back, to the groups of the Greater New York region. And, they voted, hey, well, which you guys, okay, do it, right? And then we set up like weekly, not weekly meetings, monthly meetings, where we would meet up like, and discuss, how we're going to do this book and everything like that, And then we also set up, funding, we had a budget or whatever, I can remember doing the interviews, because there was members like, gas, tolls, like, going here, going there, want to get reimbursed. One member, we broke his chop so much or whatever, After that, he didn't ask for a penny. Just put it that way, after we got done with him or whatever, But, something, it was fun, And I got to say this, we're New York, We're a rough bunch of people, But, we are very passionate about this. We are very passionate about this, And so we started to, put a flyer out, We want, requesting information, Like, this is when we're going to meet, We're looking for archives, people to get involved and everything like that, And at one of our first earlier meetings, when we started developing committees, like an archive committee, an interview committee and everything like that. And also what we ended up doing was like, we ended up by talking to other regions that done the project. Like, somebody mentioned him before, my man, Bob Gray, he was like my service mentor, and I had the privilege of serving with this man. And he told me, yeah, you got to get this, these archives together, you got to interview people and everything like that, So I talked to him about, how they did their book or whatever, I talked, I contacted actually New Zealand. It could have been Gina, it could have been Redmore, I forget, I can't find that email, and I do save a lot of things or whatever, but I contacted, people, who worked on the, New Zealand book through the RD, for New Zealand at the time, Hamish was his name, and put me in contact with them, and we contacted Nas, who put together Miracles Happen. Me, I've always, went through the Miracles Happen book and, went through everything about early New York, NA, and the same thing with Bob Stone's book, It's a wealth of information. And the same thing, with Florida's history book, talks about early New York too, So we went through, all that kind of stuff, and we developed a timeline, because like the whole thing when we started this was like, let's just go from like, when the first like, NA meetings like started in New York from 81, from 1981 to the Freedom Convention, Memorial Day weekend in 1985. I said, I don't want to get into this whole thing of going pre 1981. And guess what? That's what ended up happening or whatever. Cause when Narcotics Anonymous or whatever, and things get revised or whatever, and something, everything in the Miracles Happen helped us, and Bob Stone's book helped us, in the Florida history book, helped us. And, what ended up happening was members would show up, one member showed up with incorporation papers prior to the, NA in California in 1953 with the World Narcotics Anonymous, Another member showed up, with information, that they had of archives, a pre of NA in New York prior to 1953, So we decided to, go with that, What I want to discuss right now is a little bit about the archives and a lot of the information that we went through. So, and what ended up happening was I was active in this convention in New York at the time, and a lot of people came from all over, flew in and everything like that. And one old timer came in, and brought a bunch of archives, dropped it off to another old timer who brought it to another state or so. And one time when I was down at the regional service office, I wanted to see, what archives we have for, greater New York region. We only had I'm not even kidding, this much archives. I was like, that's it? That's it? You know what I mean? I couldn't believe it, you know what I mean? And this, old time, it gave us a big, crate of stuff, right? So we discussed it at the meeting. I ended up driving to this other state, taking those archives and driving it home. And I'm saying to myself, God forbid, if anything happens to me in this car, I got all these archives. I mean, this is it. You know what I mean? So I was protecting that with my life, and what ended up happening was me and another member, we ended up getting together at his place. He was living in Jersey at the time or whatever. And we went through several weekends of just going through all these archives. And how we did it was okay, 81 to 85 or whatever. Okay, here's the area meeting, minutes. Here's the regional meeting, minutes. Here's flyers for pioneer dances, dinosaur, events. And we started categorizing everything year to year or whatever. Okay, this is pre-1981, So we started going through all this information and everything like that, and putting it in sections. Okay, and also 3 minutes left. Wow. Okay. So let me get into the interviewing process or whatever. What we ended up doing was we ended up getting some digital recorders or whatever, and we started interviewing older members, you know what I mean? And we would hear about somebody who's sick. It's hey, we better get to this guy or whatever, you know what I mean? Somebody's got help on. We better get to this person. I kind of felt like the Grim Reaper when I would go interview these people or whatever with this digital recorder or whatever, really, it got to that point. But what was happening was, and somebody else mentioned this in the other panel, when we would start interviewing members, it was we would get the whole pitch, the whole story or whatever, you know what I mean? And we had to narrow it down, and we came up with about 26 questions, and we would narrow it down, on information that we really needed and everything like that, And also when we were interviewing them, we also developed, a questionnaire. You know what I mean? Not a questionnaire or whatever, you know what I mean? A waiver, you know what I mean? Where we, where they would sign a release, for us that we could use it, their information and everything like that, So, we would do that. And a lot of these, these interviews, they got emotional or whatever. And, you know what I mean? Tears coming from me, you know what I mean? I'm feeling it going through my body now, coming from them. I mean, just put it this way, for a number of years, wherever I went, I had this digital recorder on. And I had a list of questions on it. Wherever I went, whether it was at convention, if it was an old time, speaker jam, you know what I mean? I was at a meeting, sometimes I would see somebody, oh, they're on the list or whatever, because we would put together a list of old timers who were there, during 81 to 85, And sometimes, I would interview people outside of a meeting or whatever, go to their house, etc. You know what I mean? And that's what we did. That's what we did. And what went in the book, if, somebody else was talking about in another panel about journalistic integrity or whatever, 3 people said the same thing, okay, you know what I mean? But we also used the archives and everything. And I got to say this, you know what I mean? What ended up happening was there's definitely a higher power and a God of our understanding that was looking out for us in the greater New York region doing this book. Because what ended up happening was like one member wanted to write a preface or whatever, you know what I mean, about this book or whatever, right? You know, and we said, okay, you know. And then what we did was like we agreed to read it or whatever. And if anybody has anything, raise your hand or whatever, right? So we go line by line, right? And it's like a few sentences went by, hands went up and everything like that, you know what I mean? And what ended up happening was like, you know, I ended up breaking his chops or whatever and saying, hey, bro, you know what I mean? You know, don't quit your day job. Just put it that way, you know what I mean? With this preface, right? But what ended up happening was this higher power, this God of, you know, that was watching over us in the greater New York region, sent this lady who was a professional writer, who was a ghostwriter, and she had like maybe like not even a few years clean or whatever, you know? And let me tell you something, I used to tell everybody on this committee, whatever anybody does, do not piss this lady off, because we left to our own devices are not going to get this book written. Somebody who's a professional writer, who's a member of NA, who knows what they're doing, you know, to get this done or whatever. We'll go through the archives, we'll set up the timeline, we'll get the interviews, you know. But you know, this lady and another, another member, you know, of the committee was going through, you know, those interviews or whatever and transcribing and everything like that, you know. And you know, we really needed this lady, you know, in Narcotics Anonymous, you know, to get this book done, you know what I mean? And I'm just, you know, really grateful for it. And you know something, we went to meeting places, you know what I mean? We took photos of meeting, you know, sites or whatever. You know, we utilized the internet, you know, and the most important thing is like, anytime I would do like an interview, an interview, I would go home, write on my computer, USB, you know what I mean? Right on my computer, external hard drive. I'm emailing things out, you know what I mean? I got things on like, you know, memory sticks. I mean, you know, I was like, I don't want to lose any of this kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Scanning, you know, information, you know, making photocopies, things like that. And that's what we did. Another thing, what we did was like, we went around to a lot of the local conventions in, you know, in the region, you know what I mean? And around like the New York City, tri-state area, and a lot of the conventions that say, hey, you know, we'll give you a slot at our convention or whatever. And a lot of members of the, you know, the History Book Ad Hoc Committee was sharing about what we're doing. And hey, you know, we got some information we're looking for, archives, or, you know what I mean? Do you know anybody who got clean around this time? You know what I mean? That we might not have thought of, you know, that we might need to interview and everything like that. And we also had like a member who put together, you know, a PowerPoint presentation, because a lot of people like to see stuff, you know what I mean? Instead of like, you know what I mean, here's some things. So, you know, we did all that, you know, and I know, you know, I have like a minute, you know what I mean? And my time's like winding down and everything like that. But you know something? History is never done. We only went to 1985. And you know something, there's another 35 years. So who knows? Maybe there'll be another book called The Impossible Dream Continues. You know what I mean? Because history's always continuing in Narcotics Anonymous. This thing doesn't stop. History's going on right now. You know, and you know, the important thing is to, you know, cherish these memories, man. Get the information down, you know, while we're all here and everything like that. You know what I mean? And just keep this going. So, you know, the memories that come after us, you know what it's all about or whatever. You know, I'm starting to get a little emotional right now. So before I start shedding a tear or whatever, I'm gonna just like shut down, because I don't want to get that thing that'll come up on screen that says, you know, you mean your time's up. That's it. You know what I mean? So before that happens or whatever, you know, the person who's going to be sharing after me is going to be sharing about what happened, you know, at the completion of the book, and what ended up happening, you know, after, you know what I mean, the completion of the book and that process, and probably whatever I missed or whatever, you know what I mean? I'll probably share a little bit about that. So once again, before I share the tear, you know, I'm James, I'm an addict. Thanks for letting me share. And one more thing, you know, everybody that helped put this event together, let's have a round of applause, you know what I mean? Because this was, you know, a great thing that everybody came together to do, you know what I mean? And this is our book right here, The Impossible Dream, the history of, you know, Narcotics Anonymous in New York, and I'm sure somebody's got that to put on the screen. So with that, I'm done. I'm gonna shut up and you know, give it to the next person. Thanks.
Peter Griff, recovering addict. I have a lot of territory to cover. and I don't think I'm going to get to everything, so I'm going to get right into it. I'm trying to talk slow so Oscar can do the translation, because there are some very important points for groups that are working on books and archiving and stuff. Issues of copyright. Okay, in the United States, you have to have a copyright, and it costs money, a couple of $100. And then the book has to be, in the United States again, the book has to be registered with the Library of Congress. So these are issues that all potential book committees have to deal with. In regions outside of the US, I'm sure they have some local laws that have to be abided by, but they need to be looked into and researched. One of the issues we had was, how are we going to approach sales of the book? And since at that time the region didn't have substantial funds available, we decided to pre-sell the book. And what we did was, we wanted to produce 5,000 copies, 1,000 hardcover limited edition copies, each one numbered. And we pre-sold the special edition numbered hardcover books. And we created enough funds to produce the book. And out of those funds, we also had a book launch event, which was funded by the pre-sales. Members from all over the place, not just New York, bought 5, 10 copies of the hardcover limited edition. So that was substantial in raising the money to produce the book. We also had 4,000 soft covers, which we did not deal with. Another issue was, we created, who owns the rights to the book? And the reality is that the greater New York regional groups hold the copyright and the rights to the book as part of the greater New York regional service body. The trustee who administers the day-to-day function of the book, printing, editing, and stuff, is the greater New York region. In those bodies that are looking at doing books, they need to define where the responsibilities lie with the book, who owns it, and who has the administrative duty to tend to selling, listing it on Google, Barnes and Noble Books or whatever. So that's a substantially important thing. We archived all the documents, and we listed them and put them in folders in the regional service office. Most of them were transferred to some form of digital copy. One of the members of the committee was a professional photographer, and they photographed a good section of the archives. We also had a member do a brief PowerPoint presentation so we could show that at regional conventions, area conventions, and we showed it to the region as a whole. We had quite a few controversies in producing the book, and I'm going to go through some of the potentials. One of them was the dispute over which was the first meeting. After checking through archives, we resolved this, and we know. We produced a flyer that we had out for 5.5 years, asking for members, asking for support, asking for archives and documents. So many times at the end, when the manuscript was prepared, another thing is, we didn't need an editor. We went from producing the manuscript right to the publisher. So we had many people ask us, why wasn't I included in the list? We interviewed around 140 people. 11 passed away before the book was published. So that's true that we must get the oldest and most infirm members involved right away. So they asked, why wasn't I involved? Well, we're only doing, 1981 to 1985, May 85. Did you get clean at that time? I would say 90% of the members said no. Now you know why you're not involved. Another controversy we had is, some members who did get clean then and that time. Well, what did you do for NA back then? Nothing? Well, we're trying to get as many people who are active and capture their personal stories, but it wasn't about their personal stories. It was about stuff and information that we needed for the book. After the book was published, but it was not yet released, we created a review committee. We had 2 committees that was created by the region. The one most important was the review committee. A lot of people came on to the review committee who were not involved with the book because they wanted to get their name involved. They really didn't do anything on the review committee. They never did anything alone, but they wanted to be involved, they got involved. The first thing we said to them is that the information in the manuscripts, chapter by chapter, is not refutable. We used journalistic integrity. It's the 3rd time it's being mentioned during the workshop. It's critically important to make sure that any verbal information uses that integrity process to document something that's not a fact and what is a fact. 3 independent sources makes it a fact that's what journalists use. So we had a lot of people who just were not down with the book and a lot of controversy. So, the book was published. We were dealing with, reviewing it line by line, chapter by chapter, and a controversy came up about someone holding on to a manuscript. And the manuscript in and of itself needed to be kept secret, because if the manuscript gets out on the internet, then any region has a problem selling the book, and the worthwhileness, even though it can't be denied, the ability to sell it becomes substantially diminished. So everybody needs to bear in mind that they have to protect the intellectual properties in the manuscripts before the books gets to production, because if it gets out there, so we had that controversy. Fortunately, it turned out to be nothing. Another thing that happened was once the book came out, people were asking us, how come I didn't know about this? And my response to most of these people was, how many NA meetings do you go to a week? Oh, you don't go to that many, huh? How are you going to hear? We only had a flyer out for 5.5 years. For those who said, I go to NA meetings regularly, then I said, well, how often do you do a home group business meeting? Oh, I don't really go. Well, how do you expect to hear what's going on in Narcotics Anonymous if you're not going to your home group business meeting? If you're not doing service at some level to know that the region sent out the flyer every time they met for 5.5 years asking for help and support. So there are a lot of issues with people and, problems that go on with creating a book, as you've heard, but these are some of the specific ones. So I'm saying to people, well, if you don't go to the business meeting, you don't know. And if your home group doesn't have a GSR that attends area, how do you expect to know? This is the way we disseminate the information in Narcotics Anonymous. And if you're not a part of the solution, then you have no right to say anything, because that's the issue in terms of the way I see it. So, we deal with this. We deal with the people that are bashers. They just want to bash anything that they're not part of. And this is one of those things that we deal with. So you're going to have them. Our book took 8 years to write. I was a part of it from the beginning until the very end. It's a long-term process. And one of the major things we had was maintaining support, because support all along the process rested around basically 3 people. We had people that were there from the beginning to maybe the midway point, and then we had some people join in after the fact and had to catch up on everything. So for those who are writing a book or who are doing archives, you need to get a couple of really staunch members who are committed for the long term, because that's what it's going to take. It's not like New Zealand that did theirs in a year, a miracle in my estimation, but that's what it's going to take. People who want to be doing this and are willing to stay involved. So this is critically important. One of the things we talked about, which we didn't really do, was to include at the book launch event, which over 500 people attended, we were talking about doing a survey to be given out at the book launch event. We really didn't get a chance to get to it, but it's a good thing to consider to getting a cross-section of the membership of your region. We in New York did and made a special effort to make sure we included everybody: race, sexual identity, creed, religion. We reached out to people everywhere in the region. We went further than our region because it's a book about New York. We went to far and away upstate. We had some people in the Woodstock area who were not part of the region anymore, but were there in the beginning, and we went out of our way. We traveled hundreds and hundreds of miles to make sure we were inclusive. We went to Harlem. We went everywhere there were indigenous peoples to make sure that our book had a full and honest cross-section of the fellowship in the beginning, because it's not a complete story unless you reach out across geographical boundaries. The last thing I'm going to say is, oh, gee, just ran out of my head because I just got a text. Let me just look at the text. Oh, we reached across boundaries. And this is another very important thing for committees who are looking to do this. We reached out to AA. We reached out to churches where meetings were held. We reached out to religious organizations, newspapers, the Salvation Army, outside organizations and outside people. We reached out to AA members who were involved in helping get started the first meetings in New York. As others have said, that their meetings were, initiated and instituted by members from the other fellowship. So these are some very important points. We have shared, as Fedor said in Russia and James in England, we have shared with Isabel in Canada, we have shared what we learned, our experience, strength, and hope, our questions list for the interviews, the processes that we went through, and these items are available on a download in a file. And that's going to be posted again so that everybody who's doing something has the ability to learn from the mistakes and the successes, our experience, strength, and hope that we had during creating the 8 years of our book. I think I covered as much as I can. I have notes, and I want to thank the History Lovers Committee, because this is truly a worldwide group. We have people from everywhere on the planet. I want to give 2 shout outs in particular, one to Australia, who's not participating in this, and to New Zealand, because when I came back from World Services in 2006, and one of our staunchest members had passed away, they were inspirational in helping me to realize that what I needed to do to move forward with our history. I thank everyone very much, and I'm very grateful to have been here. Thank you.